since America and society as a whole and most of our laws are based on Christian viewpoints and um, Christian morals, do you believe that it would be better to not have laws?
You know, I have to say that initially I was puzzled by this question because, with all due respect to anarchists, it just seemed to me unlikely that there would be many people who would say, yes, I think it's better if we don't have laws. But in any case, the short answer to your question is no. I don't think it would be better if we had no laws. I value my safety and my family's safety as much as anyone else, so I'm quite happy we have police and that they have something to enforce, namely the law. Additionally, the law is a passionate interest of mine both intellectually and professionally, so I have all sorts of reasons for keeping the law around. At a more general level, there are a few aspects of your question that merit being teased out and analyzed, so I'm going to give that a try. First, it seems to me your question assumes some ground in controversy, namely whether American law is in fact based on Christian notions, and if it is, to what extent it is so based, and what's the significance of that. Second, and related, even if American law is based on Christian notions, is that enough for the law's legitimacy? The late Supreme Court Justice Harry Blackmun summarized it perfectly when he wrote, "The legitimacy of secular legislation depends on whether the state can advance some justification for its law beyond its conformity to religious doctrine." I'd argue there are three sources of American law. I list them here alphabetically: English common law, liberalism, particularly as articulated by John Locke, and a healthy skepticism. Now, each of these was influenced to some degree by Christian notions, but as Professor Noah Feldman argues in his excellent book, Divided by God, America's Church-State Problem and What We Should Do About It, these different ideas swam in a sea of Protestant assumptions, and the framers' generation argued politics in light of ideals connected to their common Protestant legacy. Rather than insisting anachronistically on, quote, Judeo-Christian values, unquote, it would be more accurate to say that the framers assumed a whole set of principles that grew out of Protestant Christianity as interpreted by English liberals such as John Locke. Where contemporary evangelicals go wrong historically is in assuming that those Protestant-originated principles required that Christian values infuse all activities of the state. Simply put, the founders did intend a separation of religion from the state. They saw government and religion as operating in separate realms, really. And it was as early as 1644 that the very Baptist Roger Williams first gave us the metaphor of a wall of separation between the church and the state. So the way that some contemporary Christians argue about all of this presents at best revisionist history and shoddy scholarship, and at worst, just plain falsehoods. So, American law was influenced by Christian notions, but it seems to me to say too much to argue that such notions are the basis of American law. Here's the summary of my response then to question 3. 1, no, it wouldn't be better to be without law. 2, Christian notions, while they influenced American law, are not its foundation. And 3, conformity to religious doctrine is not the mark of legitimate law in the United States.
How was the earth made? How do you believe that the earth was made? Now, I'm not talking about evolution.
Beyond that, I'm clueless, so I wouldn't waste your time or my time talking about it.
Obviously, atheists in general, most atheists believe that the world would be better without religion. Do you believe that the world would be better without believing in a deity? And if so, how would that help people as a whole?
Right, okay. How would the world be better off without belief in a deity? Okay, I got it. First, it's highly unlikely that any of us would ever have to hear from these two Meshuggahs ever again. Atheist nightmare indeed. This poor schmuck could go get a massage without turning his life upside down. This lunatic would actually have to go out and find work, and Jehovah's Witnesses would stop showing up at my door at the crack of dawn on Saturday mornings. Is it any wonder they call that magazine of theirs Awake? Now, if this is not cause for celebration, I don't know what is. Seriously though, you ask a good question. Would the world be better off without belief in a deity? You're not asking if the world would be better off without religion, which is a somewhat different question. It's also a somewhat easier question to answer. With all the religiously fueled conflicts seemingly everywhere in the world, one suspects even believers are able to see the advantages of a world without religion. In fact, many believers claim to eschew religion in favor of, for example, a, quote, relationship with Jesus, unquote. So it seems even among some believers, religion is seen as a bad thing. Now, if the pantheon were thinned down to one God and one God only in whom everyone would believe, or at least if the members of the pantheon would put aside their differences and pretend to be one God, would the world be better off without belief in this deity? The short answer is yes. The author of the Gospel of John puts in the voice of Jesus one of the greatest insights in human history. The truth will set you free. Ask anyone who has experienced some type of liberation, and he or she will tell you how wonderful it ultimately is. Coming to terms with the truth about God, the truth being that there is no God, is one of the most, if not the most, liberating experience there is. Faith has its apparent comforts and felicities, but the truth sets one free. You know, for most of my life, I thought of atheists as angry people. Not to say there aren't angry atheists, there are, but in my experience, anger isn't what it's about. It's about establishing meaning in my life and coming to terms with reality, knowing this is the only shot I get at it. Not to be mawkish, but St. Catherine of Siena said, if you are what you should be, you will set the world on fire. Of course, what we should be are healthy, fully integrated people who embrace rather than fear reality. By the way, am I the only atheist on YouTube who's been quoting Jesus and the saints with approbation? Because if I am, I think I should get some kind of prize. Don't you agree? So, here's the summary of my response to question 5. Yes, the world would be better off without belief in a deity, because embracing reality is always better than avoiding it. The truth sets one free. Well, that's it. I'm out of time. I've answered the 5 questions. I hope it's been as interesting for you as it has been for me. Thanks for the opportunity, and catch you next time.